Hi, this is Attorney John Montague. Last night, I found myself up late at night listening to the Joe Rogan Jensen Huang podcast, basically, where Joe had Jensen on his podcast. And there's so many great insights from that interview. I highly encourage everybody to watch it because they get into, some of the future of AI and, how this technology evolved, and it was just absolutely fascinating. But I really wanted to hone in on two things that Jensen said that I thought were very interesting and very accurate fundamental truths. And that's basically what can get you into trouble as an entrepreneur. And as he's on the podcast, he's basically describing a deal that he needs to go to Sega, who he had a big contract with and basically wasn't able to deliver on. And he was able to convince them to give him the money anyways, but in the form of an investment. And he said if he didn't get this deal, that the company would be completely vaporized overnight, basically, because they would have run out of money. Um, so that's one example that I took from, which is basically he's acknowledging that if you're in technology, and you're building frontier technology, your lifeblood is capital, which can keep these intelligent people working around you, working on solving the problem. And I imagine at that point, people were at low salaries, but there's all sorts of other things, of course, now like compute equipment, and I'm sure back then that went into, why the money was needed, but you have to have the money to be able to conduct these experiments. So the first thing to watch out for as a founder, I think, is running out of money. And sometimes you have to do things without knowing that you're going to get the money, but that's what kills a startup time and time again. So as you're thinking about things and as you're planning and even before evaluating what you're going to do as an entrepreneur, you really want to make sure, am I going to be successful raising the capital? And that's impossible to establish up front. But I think, you know, a lot of times entrepreneurs come to me or they come to an investor and they have these great ideas and these great technologies, but they haven't thought through the ability to raise capital through commercialization. And I think that's the number one thing that you just make sure you don't want to fail. As my, father, who since passed, would say, we call that staying power. So number one, most important thing for entrepreneurs is make sure you have staying power. The second thing, which he kind of indirectly said this, is Jensen says, I am the longest standing tech CEO. And, Joe's like, wow, really? That's true? And Jensen's like, yeah, yeah. And he goes, well, I haven't been fired yet. And I think that is an incredibly insightful thing in relation to startups and entrepreneurships, and something that I can even relate with being a small business owner and small practitioner. One of the reasons I like running my own firm is I can't be fired. That's also a good reason to start a company. Um, Oftentimes, if you're trying to complete a long-term project, you might not see the yields or benefits of what you're doing for 3 to 5 years down the road, maybe 10 years, depending on the technology. Um, and I think that's incredibly insightful as you're setting up corporate structures. And, the trap oftentimes isn't valuation per se, because there's a variety of mechanisms like super majority voting mechanisms that founders have access to, and I'd be happy to discuss if that's helpful. And they can be difficult to sell, frankly, but most of the entrepreneurs that go a very long way into the future, they have super majority shares. They have power of attorney as needed. They have these functionalities that are you put in a shareholders agreement. But basically, what I'm describing is much more important than the economics as an entrepreneur is making sure that you maintain this realm of control long as possible, at least until you have a certain level of success. And of course, anybody would be crazy to want to propose firing someone like Jensen, but and I haven't looked at NVIDIA's corporate documents to see what their control mechanism is, but you'll see this with Snapchat, a lot of the what I'll call millennial founder companies, my generation, have set up these super majority voting structures, and I think this is important to consider as you're raising money and as you're going forward. And it often doesn't come into play at the seed stage or perhaps even the Series A. I wouldn't say you want to negotiate this from the very standpoint. You don't want to say like, hey, investor, I'll take your money, but only if you agree. I'm going to be in control into perpetuity. Excuse me. Because frankly, that comes across as a little bit crazy. But as you garner power and success and credibility, these are the things that you want to be looking for. And I think it's important that you discuss with your lawyer, or you come up with these ways yourself. And oftentimes, lawyers, unfortunately, especially at the big firms, um, they try to just be middle of the road and get deals done. I like to say that the approach that I take is really just being the best advocate for the entrepreneur as I can. And oftentimes, when I take a position with an entrepreneur and I lay out a point, I might even say something along the lines of, listen, if the deal doesn't work out, perhaps you don't pay my legal fees. Just so they know that I have skin in the game. I don't do that at all times, but it has something that I've done before. And so my main takeaway with the interview with Jensen is, you want to be a tech CEO as long as possible, and two, don't run out of money. These are incredibly simple, almost stupid things to say, but I think we get like so caught up in the networking and being aggressive and business plans and all these other things. But if you really take care of those two things, that gives you the space and time and money to be able to iterate and be successful. So watch the money, always be raising money, because you want to have dry powder in a down market. And then two, uh, always be thinking about that control mechanism. Because in order for you to fulfill your ultimate vision, you have to be in the chair. It's sort of like the analogy of if you have a quarterback and you take them out mid-season, the quarterback ideally, and it's a different dynamic, but if the quarterback could, they would continue to take that shot again and again and again and try to win. And that's what entrepreneurship is about. It's about these long tail experiences. And if you're just playing in the bell curve, you're not more than likely going to be successful because you're going to be a median of everything. You have to hit these long tail opportunities. And to hit a long tailed opportunity, you have to be able to bear the anxiety and fear of what you're doing. So those are a couple of insights I had today, and hope everyone has a great weekend.